I was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1954, the year that Brown versus the Board of Education was upheld by the United States Supreme Court, stating that separate but equal was unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States.
And I was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1960. The year of the Civil Rights Act of 1960 was passed, a federal law that established federal inspection of local voter registration polls and introduced penalties for anyone who obstructed someone's attempt to register to vote.
I am of German, French, and Iberian heritage.
And I am of African American and Cherokee heritage.
I had the joy of living next door to my grandparents when I was growing up. It shaped my life in so many ways. Mama and Granddaddy were my best friends. Granddaddy was my champion, and I was his shadow. And one of our favorite things to do was to sit on the metal glider on their front porch as he would relay stories to me about being born in 1899. He saw amazing changes from horse to car, from early radio to color TV. Change can be exciting. Change can be difficult. One hot summer day, when I was 6 or 7, I can't really remember when, Granddaddy chose to sit on the top step of their front steps instead of on the glider. I tried to talk, but he was very quiet. His face was stern, his jaw set. As he watched children, in that day they were called the colored children, walk past our homes. This was the summer that our local swimming pool was integrated, and colored people were allowed to be in the same pool as white people. It was also the summer that our family joined a new country club with a fancy swimming pool.
I love to pack for our yearly pilgrimage to Grandma's house in Tate, Georgia. Barbie dolls, check, and their clothes. Coloring books and crayons, check. Nancy Drew mysteries, check. Archie comic books, check. I loved helping my mom pack our cooler for the 500 plus miles we traveled across 3 states. We loaded up the car and my mother would say, "Karen, now go use the bathroom before we leave." Yes, Mama. The cooler and I shared the back seat. And it wasn't long into the journey that I would sample the variety of sandwiches and chips, homemade cookies, thermoses of water, and my favorite chocolate candy. Then the chorus from the back seat would begin. Are we there? Yes. And the dreaded, can we stop now? I need to use the... My younger self didn't know at the time that we couldn't just stop anywhere. There were certain places that were more amenable to my father, my mother, and to me. And even though the signs were down, even though the signs had been removed, there was still the essence there.
Junior high was not a pleasant experience for me. I was awkward and insecure. In 7th and 8th grade, I was bullied constantly by a group of girls. And for this story, you should know they were white girls, mean junior high girls. They were unrelenting. And I spent much of my first 2 years of junior high attempting to hide from them. The locker next to mine belonged to a large girl in size and stature, and her name was Tanya Dixon. Tanya and I also sat next to each other in math class and helped each other. A friendship began to blossom. She was the first black girl I really had the opportunity to talk to get to know. Well, one afternoon, the bullies surrounded me at my locker to taunt me and remind me that they would be waiting for me after school. And suddenly, as if Moses parted the Red Sea, Tanya pushed through the mean girls and stood between us. If you want to fight anyone, you can fight me, so you better get your skinny selves out of here and leave my friend alone. Tanya stood up for me and became my 8th grade hall walking bodyguard, escorting me through the hallways of the school. Eventually, the bullying stopped. We remained good friends the remainder of junior high. We lost touch after that when we went to different high schools, but I will never forget Tanya Dixon. You see, Tanya demonstrated what courage is and what trust feels like. My granddaddy was wrong. Tanya and I might have looked different from each other, but we had so many more things in common.
I'm the mother of 3 wonderful sons. As they approach driving age, and even to this day, this is the talk that we share with them. It's important you make it home. Be polite. Don't antagonize. And always make sure they see your hands. Do what they say. Don't get into any arguments now. And please don't have an attitude. Ask the police before you reach for your license. Ask the police for permission to get your insurance and registration out of the glove box. Just do as you are told. And make sure your hands are where they can see. And don't make any hesitations. And if they tell you to get down, get down. Baby, it's important that you make it home.
In the late 70s and early 1980s, I was a general assignment reporter for the CBS affiliate in Montgomery, Alabama. I was in my mid-20s. My cameraman, an African American named Jimmy Johnson, was in his late 20s. Jimmy and I covered many stories together. We were colleagues and friends. In August of 1979, 14 years after Alabama troopers clubbed a civil rights march to a halt and put Selma into the history books, the Ku Klux Klan attempted to recreate the march. The destination was the state capitol in Montgomery, where the Klansmen planned to burn a cross. And though local and state officials planned to stop the marchers at the city limits, the Imperial Wizard planned to carry on, saying, "We're going on through no matter what." Jimmy and I parked our car, and after waiting in that high humidity and heat for what seemed like an eternity, we saw a group of several hundred marchers coming up the road. And as they neared us, I saw that Jimmy's usually steady hands were shaking as he readied the camera. The taunts and the jeers began to pepper the air, and suddenly a Klansman tried to grab my microphone. At that point, Jimmy stood between us, and the Klansman yelled both of us, calling me white trash, and N-word followed by the word lover. in the faces of those who resembled me, not Jimmy. I saw the same fear that was on my grandfather's face. But you see, now I saw something else. I saw a hatred, pure hatred, and I hurt. My spirit hurt for all the ways that Jimmy experienced fear and hatred at every turn because of skin color. Wow.
Conversation with our son driving while black. Mom, Dad, wake up. What's going on? Are you okay? Yes, but you're not going to believe this. Believe what? I was just pulled over. Oh my God, are you okay? I'm a little shaken up, but okay. I was driving down the street and I saw the police car and started to follow me, and lo and behold, the lights came on and I pulled over. Mom, I promise I wasn't. Mom, I promise. Mom, I promise I was going the speed limit. I put my hands on the steering wheel and I remember my heart racing so fast I couldn't even catch my breath. The officer came around to the passenger side and motioned for me to roll down my window. He asked for my driver's license and registration, and I told him it was in the glove compartment. He motioned for me to get them. And as he was looking over my papers, he asked what I was doing on the street this late at night. I told him I was going home. I'd just gotten off work. He must have missed the address on my license or didn't believe me, so I told him that I lived across the street from the church where my mother is the pastor. And the officer, knew you, Mom. Of course he did. So he let me go. And he told me to be careful. And Mom and Dad, I am so glad I made it home.
I wish we could tell you that these stories are just stories from our distant past. But as members of the West Ohio Cabinet, as well as a female clergy person, I have personally experienced congregations within our conference who have clearly stated, we will take any pastor, just not a black or a woman. Friends, we can do better, and we must do better.
We may have had different experiences.
And we may look different from one another, but we are children of God.
And sisters in Christ.
And pastors. Pastors in the United Methodist Church.
Thank you for sharing your story. Hello, everyone. My name is Andres DeArco, and I came here today with the mission of sparking a conversation. Now, my story within the church starts way back when I was a kid, and as many of you who are also pastors' kids can probably relate, Sunday mornings meant waking up extra early and to set up the sanctuary, to play with the band. And for me, as a kid, I actually enjoyed those parts of Sundays. because Sunday mornings were the times where I knew I was going to see my best friends. And also as a kid, you realize that there was really two parts to church that you knew to be true. One, there'd be free snacks in the church kitchen. And two, my friends would be in the meeting room waiting to tell me about the next level of Mario Kart that they reached. Those are really just the two things that I knew as a little kid. But growing up within the church, I realized that there was much more to my experience that marked my life and my experience within the church. I realized that there was a critical third truth to my experience in Mason, Ohio, and that was that exclusion would be deeply tied into everything that I did as a kid. And now, I didn't really realize this division that existed in my church until a few years into me being part of this church. I didn't see the division that was often played out in the everydays of church worship. But as I started to grow up, I saw that the church was truly divided in both its congregations and languages and cultures. You see, I grew up in a Hispanic Latino ministry in a general Anglo church. And so what this meant for me was that in every sense, we were divided. We worshiped on one side of the building while the other congregation worshiped on the other side. We spoke Spanish, they spoke English. One side had many, many resources, and one side did not have as many. So what this meant for us was not necessarily anything that I could really express up until I ended up hearing a conversation with somebody between the two Anglo churches. And they were talking about going over to our side of the church, and they said, we were going to the Mexican side of the church. And for me, that was a very shocking experience for me because, one, as an immigrant coming from Latin America, you're used to hearing these terms, Mexican as a general term to describe people that spoke Spanish. And for somebody like me, that wasn't something that shocked me. That was not the part. The part that shocked me was that this was coming from an elderly person, someone who I thought would know better. So moving forward in my experience in the church, I realized that this comfort was something that we became used to. It sounds uncomfortable in the beginning explaining this, that we had two separate churches, two whole congregations that worshiped in the same building but did not interact. But looking deeper, it was actually what we were comfortable with. You see, by being two separate churches, we were able to have the same language, the same culture, all expressed within our comfortable space. But this is where the messages of the Bible and modern culture may not necessarily see hand in hand. Now, for Jesus, love was demanded to be at the center of everything that was done in the church. Separation then became the antithesis of that love. And for our church, that was very much the case. And moving forward from that, Jesus called in this perfect condition to be able to see past those differences, to be able to embrace the differences that we had. He even extended his hand out to Zacchaeus, a hated tax collector. And to him, in Matthew 19:14, when the children tried to come into the house to play and the disciples shooed them away, Jesus said, "Let the children come, for it is as these that the kingdom of heaven is open to." And now, I believe this is a perfect message for the United Methodist Church today. Because today, we often have this time of angst, this time of anxiousness of what's going to happen. And when people see somebody like me, they say, "Andres, how do we get people in the church that are like you, diverse like you, young like you, to come into our church?" And I don't have all the answers to this, but something that I can offer up is to be able to see yourselves within the church, and to be able to extend your hand past the Sunday mornings, but into your homes. So when we talk about love within the church, it's not just necessarily talking about church on Sunday mornings. It is who are we inviting into our homes that also matter. Do the people that we invite to dinner reflect the people that we want on our Sunday mornings? Those are questions that we must ask ourselves as a church, and those aren't easy questions to be asking oneself. And so a lot of times we think about these things, and we don't necessarily have all the answers to them, but the thing that we must always keep in mind is that church is a community, and that community extends far beyond Sunday mornings. And as Christians, and especially Methodists, we do love inviting people to church. That's a given. But it's not always the same case when it comes to inviting people into our homes. This is the very reason why I love Jesus. You see, Jesus defied these odds. He defied these customs of just simply inviting people on the surface level. He went far beyond that and reached into his homes. In the scripture, it said that he invited himself into Zacchaeus' home. And that's where that truly marks the difference. Now, for me, I'm someone that's interested in business and was one of the board directors of one of a CEO in Dallas said, as he was speaking to the other executives, he mentioned that it is not necessarily the goal that we have to extend far beyond the goals that we have. But we have the duty and the calling to the journey of reaching to the goal. And what that necessarily was, that we all know what the goal is. The only question remains is what are we willing to let go in order for that goal to be reached? You see, he knew that it was not just the goal that was the problem. Rather, it was what are we willing to let go? What are the barriers that we have that we must let go as a church, as people, that we must let go and move past to be able to be the church that God wants to see. And now, that's interesting because you cannot move into a new goal with the same mindset. In the same way, we cannot expect the church to transform if we ourselves do not transform, if we ourselves are not willing to make that change. So the question becomes then, what are we as a conference, as a church, as people willing to give up and to let go in order for love to stand at the center of all that we do? And this may be uncomfortable. It may be something that we have to reach for higher, but it's something that's necessary for us to ask. We have to be honest with ourselves and understand that maybe a face like mine is not some face that's usually seen up in West Ohio in the conferences. But that's also something that we have to be honest with ourselves in speaking. And moving forward from this, we are called in this mission to reflect the church that we want to see in our lives. To be able to be those people that invite people that don't necessarily look like us, but that we want to see in the church. So if we're not willing to reach out to those people away from Sunday, then it's not something that we're truly reaching for in honesty and sincerity. And that's something that I believe that the church should strive to uphold, is to be able to reach out to the people that speak different languages, that may worship in the same areas around you, but you may not necessarily know their name. And that's a very comfortable place that we've often found ourselves in. That we say the highs and byes to people, but we don't know who they are or what their story is. But if we're not knowing people's stories, then we're not truly reaching in fellowship. And that's something that we have to always keep in mind. And now for my church, we were very separate. We didn't know anybody from the other side, from the American side, or Los Americanos, how we say in Spanish. But on one specific Ash Wednesday, the pastor invited us into his church And a couple of us came from our congregation, from our Latino congregation, and we sat down in our little corner on the church. And looking around, I was still a young kid, but I looked around and I said to my friend, I don't know a single person in this congregation. I don't even know the pastor's name, and I've been here for over 6 years. And that was something that was eye-opening to me, because it's not just in that church that I was able to see that. It was throughout many churches in West Ohio and in my experience. And I truly believe that God has called us to a mission outside of this surface level fellowship that we've been able to have to this point. So, with this being said, I encourage you all to go beyond the regular Sunday mornings and to reach into something new, to be able to invite people that may not necessarily look like you, but are also important into our everyday lives. That it may not be just on Sundays, but it might be on the Wednesdays that you want to invite somebody out to eat, or you want to invite somebody to eat with you at your home. These are also the important interactions that we must have in the West Ohio Conference. And for me as a young person, I gotta say that I'm basically done with the invitations to other people's churches if I cannot later enjoy some time to eat with you, to have fellowship with you. At this point, I wouldn't mind if it's the pastor, the superintendent, the bishop, maybe not the bishop, but but if we're not having fellowship outside of just the regular Sunday mornings, then it's something that has to be addressed within the church, because we truly are called to be a community within the West Ohio. And with that, I thank you so much for being able to listen, and I encourage you all to share your stories as well as you move forward. Thank you.